We're going to get started with the Planning Sustainability Commission hearing. Howard?
We'll have a little conversation about that.
This is the July 9th Planning Sustainability Commission meeting. Today on our agenda, we have call order business, items of interest from commissioners, consent agenda of consideration of minutes from 6/25/13. We have a briefing, Southwest Corridor Plan, Jay Signet. And then we have the remainder is a West Hayden Island Plan, a work session. There will be no public testimony. It's work session and then recommendation. And we'll see if we vote today, hopefully. So that's our agenda. Let's get started with items of interest from the commissioners. Anything? Oh, good. Director's report?
Just quickly, I wanted to mostly just, when we get to the West Hayden Island item, I just wanted to thank you all and to thank staff, to thank Joe and Eric and Rachel and Mindy and all the others that have done amazing work, Phil. Your diligence on this, your expertise, your countless hours of work studying the issues, reading reports, listening, carefully listening to the residents of the island and to the folks on all sides of the issue. It's been a long haul, and I just really wanted to be able to thank you and just have you all know how much council and the community, I think, everyone here, no matter which way the vote goes, really appreciates the time and your community service. And so I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Consent agenda, consideration of minutes from 6/25/13. Is there a motion? A second?
I think I do.
I'll second that.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Good. Passed. Southwest Corridor Plan, Jay?
Good morning. So I'm Jay Sugnitz with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. With me is Malou Wilkinson from Metro. She is the project manager for the Southwest Corridor. So I'm just going to give a very quick introduction and then turn it over to her and then leave plenty of time for questions. So also in the audience, we have Denver Agarda from Bureau of Transportation, and he's been working on this project quite a while and will be in the future, which is good because I'm leaving, by the way. So this is the last time you'll see me. Moving on to Colorado.
Where are you
Right.
moving
I keep
to?
telling him I'm, no, I guess. No, my wife took a job in Lakewood, Colorado, so I'll be moving on. But I will be back, I promise. All our family is here. So you all remember the Barber Concept Plan, hopefully, right? We voted on that not too long ago. That was in April. So the whole idea with the Barber Concept Plan, we got a grant from Metro to do the land use planning as a precursor to any sort of discussion about high-capacity transit. So really the mantra has been land use should lead these discussions. So identify where are the important places in the corridor and then use transit and active transportation as a way to connect those places. So with that, we wanted to come to the commission prior to this phase of the Southwest Corridor concluding. The mayor will be voting on July 22nd for this draft recommendation, and Malou will go over that recommendation. But we wanted to make sure that you knew what was happening, what the timeline was, and we're aware of the public involvement that's happened to date before we embark on that next phase. So with that, I will turn it over to Malou to go through the recommendation.
All right, thank you, Jay. And we at Metro will miss Jay tremendously as well, as I'm sure you all will. I wanted to, so I handed out to all of you a summary of our draft recommendation. So you have this really short summary. There's a lot more information available on our website if you want to get into more detail reading through it. And I'll show you what that is in a minute. Well, maybe I'll just tell you right now. So we have the summary of what the recommendation is, and then there's a longer document that has more information about how we got to the recommendation and what it means. There's also, and there are 2 attachments to the recommendation. One that is kind of a map book that includes project lists of roadway, active transportation, and parks and habitat projects in the Southwest Corridor. And then there's another attachment that describes some of the development, regulatory, and policy incentive tools that can help achieve the community visions for all of the places in the Southwest Corridor. It's a menu of tools. It's not that any one of these should be used in every place, but kind of a menu to choose from. So those are pieces of it. We also have a public involvement report that is available on our website that is kind of a book. We had a number of involvement opportunities in person and especially online. And in June, we held a community planning forum where we invited citizens from across the Southwest Corridor to give us their feedback. But we also had an online survey, and we were pleased that we received over 2,500 responses to our online survey. So we feel like we at least got good amount of involvement from. I don't have a breakdown by city, but Portland has more population, so I know that a large percentage of those respondents will be from Portland, but I'm sure that the other cities are well covered in that as well. So those are pieces that are all available. We can send you the links to that afterwards if that makes sense, but I wanted you to have the summary in your hands. So I'm going to go on. So I just wanted to quickly remind you again what the Southwest Corridor Plan is and how we began. We began by looking at both the area from Portland to Sherwood as being the top priority in the region to look at for the next investment in high-capacity transit. That was one reason. We secondly began by, it was identified as one of the top 2 regional mobility corridors for further study, and that was looking at all kinds of transportation investments from freight to pedestrians and biking. So those were some of the 2 reasons that we began the Southwest Corridor, but the most important thing was what Jay referred to, which is that we really wanted the land use to guide our investments in transportation rather than the other way around. So the land use work that each of the cities has done has been a foundational piece of this effort. We know that there's a lot of growth expected in the Southwest Corridor. There are already a lot of people and jobs. Those darker areas up there show the concentrations of future growth as anticipated by the communities. As we put those the land use vision that each of the communities worked on from Sherwood up to Portland, as we put them all together, we kind of tried to look for the themes from the land use perspective so that we could be sure that as we're thinking about transportation, we're thinking about how we support that land use vision. And you can see kind of the main points up there that there are a number of very stable single-family residential neighborhoods that are anticipated to stay that way, but that can be better supported with more retail, entertainment, education, and jobs. The colorful places on that map are the places that are anticipated for change, and the pink generally refers to either mixed use or commercial, the blue being employment with a lot of employment in the Southwest Corridor, and the yellow being more higher intensity residential. The circles on that map were identified by the cities, and as we were thinking about designing high capacity transit alternatives, we were using those circles to kind of connect the dots rather than looking at roads, so that we're really trying to support the community visions throughout the Southwest Corridor. So with that, that's all the background that I wanted to give you. I know that we've been here before. I want to just go over what the recommendation is. So July 22nd, we are asking our steering committee to act on this draft recommendation that you have in front of you, and it includes a transit element, a strategic set of roadway and active transportation projects, some prioritized parks and natural resource projects, and the policies and incentives for further exploration that I described to you at the beginning. As I said, we've done as much public involvement as I think we've been able to manage, both between Metro and in partnership with each of the cities in the Southwest Corridor during this phase. It's not, it's not the end of public engagement. It's really the beginning of, if we continue to move forward, we'll continue to do more engagement with the public. So I want to first focus on the transit piece. And if you want to read, it's really on if you open up your document, it's on the second page. In October of 2012, the steering committee narrowed down from 10 high-capacity transit alternatives to 5. Some of the things they took off were streetcar all the way to Sherwood, which was streetcar was determined to be more of an urban circulator rather than a long-term connector. Took off improvements to West, because West is more of a separate study than in this corridor. Took off high-capacity transit along I-5, since that wasn't serving the land use places in the corridor that were identified by the communities. And so that's just a flavor of what they narrowed from. And in July, the decision that we're looking for is really kind of more of a narrowing, what should we study further decision. And we're looking for direction on the Southwest Transit Service Enhancement Plan, which is really thinking about how TriMet can better serve the communities in the corridor with local transit. Policy direction on the level of BRT for further study, bus rapid transit. And I'll get into each of these slightly more in a minute. Which modes to carry forward for further study, and how far should we go down that corridor from Portland to Sherwood. We are looking at a refinement phase that would take about a year, so that we can really refine what kind of a project would potentially go into a National Environmental Policy Act study. We're not into that yet. We're still refining that. And so some of the more alignment design-oriented decisions would be in this refinement timeframe, and there would be opportunity for engagement around those over the next year. And also a really key thing that we need to be talking about over that timeframe is funding, how we would fund both the planning and the implementation of a high-capacity transit project. Looking at, if we keep following this path, looking at completing a draft environmental impact statement in early 2017. So that's kind of the overall timeframe for the transit element. So the Southwest Service Enhancement Plan would really direct TriMet to take a number of actions to improve local service. They've done this in western Washington County, in the Forest Grove, Hillsborough area, and this is something that we are really excited to see them do throughout Southwest Portland. There is a map in the bigger version of the recommendation, it's not in this, that shows something that I just wanted to refer to. It shows potential new lines. You don't see potential new lines in Southwest Portland, but what might be more important in Southwest Portland would be the reliability and frequency of service, and also the connections to that service, potentially related to active transportation. So those are the elements of the Southwest Service Enhancement Plan that this recommendation would direct TriMet to begin. The modes for further study in the recommendation include both light rail and bus rapid transit. That's based on a couple of things. First, there's high ridership potential for both modes in our study, in our travel demand modeling. And we also, because we were looking at so many different alternatives, and I believe you've seen them in the past, it was really not cost effective to get into any sort of type of design level work. And so we need to, by narrowing down what we're looking at, we can get more information on design, and we can have better information for people on capital costs, on operating efficiency, and how the different modes would support the Southwest Corridor land use vision. So that's in the recommendation. Part of the recommendation is also that the level of BRT, bus rapid transit, can be implemented in a number of different ways, from operating in mixed traffic with some signal priorities and queue jumping, to down all the way to operating in a separate right-of-way, almost like a train on wheels. And the recommendation that is currently in front of the steering committee is that it be between 50 and 100% of the alignment in exclusive right-of-way. This would allow the project to be eligible for New Starts funding and be competitive at the national level with that. And we also believe it would be most supportive of the land use vision based on the work that we've done so far. The destination that the steering committee has in front of them right now is to Tualatin via Tigard. This is based on ridership potential, operational efficiency, and plans for increased housing and employment in Tigard and Tualatin. You'll notice past Tigard, the recommendation is not to have high-capacity transit on 99W. That was based on concerns from both Tigard and ODOT and business owners along 99W to maintain that capacity there and also to better serve Tualatin and their downtown. The recommendation does not include high-capacity transit between Tualatin and Sherwood, and that is from the work that we did and the conversations in the community. Sherwood felt like better local service would serve their needs over the time frame that we're looking at. So that's.
Can I interrupt you for a second, though? I don't understand the reasoning on 99W. Why didn't they want the transit to be on 99W?
They were looking to maintain that as a freight route and to.
Do they have sufficient bus ridership on? Because I drive that all the time. That's seems like very, very congested streetway. You'd see a lot of commerce, so you'd see a lot of people waiting for a bus, waiting for a train. So it's kind of counterintuitive. They'll say, no, I don't want it on the busy route.
Well, I think it was both a technical perspective from ridership. There's more land use supportiveness when you go down through the other area, but also perhaps other ways to address that congestion on 99W.
What is the bus ridership now on 99W? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, that would be important. I would recommend knowing the answer to that. Okay.
We can get that back to you. So that was a transit recommendation, and I'll walk through the rest of it, and then I think we're hoping to have a conversation about this. So we have a number of roadway and active transportation projects. We started out with close to $4 billion worth of roadway and active transportation projects. We've narrowed down to around $500 million across all of the cities in the Southwest Corridor. And so it's about 81 projects. It's still probably more money than will be available over the next 15 years, which is the time frame of this plan. But these are high priority projects either for supporting an investment in high capacity transit or supporting the land use vision. And so we really were looking at both as we narrowed down this list. And so I guess that says what I just told you. But what's really important is that as we move through a refinement phase, we don't have a design for a high-capacity transit project. And so we really need to figure out which projects would be associated with a high-capacity transit and really part of it, and which projects need to move forward under other means. And so we'll be working together if we move into a refinement phase to figure out kind of how to land all of these different projects and how to best work together to see them get implemented. So we also have the list of green projects, which is really exciting for us to have kind of a mini regional transportation plan, but for parks and habitat projects. We've never had this before. And it came from, in Portland, it came from a variety of different sources. Out in Washington County, it came from Clean Water Services and a number of different habitat and conservation groups. And so it's exciting overall just to have the list, but it also, we've worked to prioritize it based on the land use vision. And so having this will be, allow us to be opportunistic in terms of looking at where we can leverage our dollars together to support the land use vision. And so really our next steps, the steering committee is considering this recommendation in 2 weeks, and we're hoping that our project partners will adopt the Southwest Corridor Plan by resolution in the fall of 2013, and that we would then move into a refinement phase that's really focused on how we move forward on a high-capacity transit investment, figuring out which of these associated projects move forward with that, and which of the policies and tools really need to move forward in concert with a high-capacity transit investment. And we're looking at a steering committee decision to move into NEPA in early 2014. So that's kind of our overall time frame for this project. And I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Would you add anything, Jay?
Before I move forward, just make sure everybody's got their microphones on, because there's people in the back there that may not be able to hear. So, Questions? Don, Chris?
Just a real simple one. You mentioned your project partners would have an adoption process. Who are the partners, Malou?
Each of the cities and agencies that are part of the Southwest Corridor Plan Steering Committee.
So there'd be a series of city council adoptions?
Yeah, I think, well, there'll be a vote at
At the
the
steering
At the
committee.
Metro Steering Committee. The mayor is on that steering committee
Great.
currently, and Commissioner Novick will be taking over that position in the, I think, after this vote, actually.
Okay, great, thank you.
Chris?
So I have several questions and comments. So I had the opportunity to serve on the Barber Concept Plan, which helped straighten out Portland's land use vision for this, and appreciate leading with land use. Makes a lot of sense to me, and I am delighted that we have, in this project, decided to get out of the freeway ditch and take the transit to the land uses rather than try and bring land uses close to the freeway ditch later because the right-of-way is cheap. So, you know, important change in paradigm. A lot of the folks that I worked on the Barber Concept Plan with seem to be very excited about the, I don't necessarily mean excited in a positive way, more in an agitated way, about the choice of how we're going to get the PCC and what's going to happen in terms of the local streets where the high-capacity transit might get routed in that area. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and confirm when those choices get made in this process?
Yeah, so you're referring to whether we serve Portland Community College Sylvania campus directly or indirectly. And I have been out to walk along the little street that was drawn on the map without walking on it, and Haynes Street. And so I think we haven't addressed that specifically in this recommendation because we want to preserve our, we want to make decisions in an informed way, but we want to, I think we have received a number of great ideas from the neighbors there in terms of how to serve PCC directly without going along Haynes. And so that Haynes Road was not necessarily that itself is not the option. The choice is that if you serve PCC directly or indirectly, and you can use a different street to do that. So that's where we're trying to keep the conversation at, do we need to serve PCC directly? And if so, how's the best way that we can do that? We have a lot of reasons why the best way to do that is not the red line that was originally on our map. And that's all part of our record and would be part of the refinement phase moving forward.
Refinement phase is where that'll get settled.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, I appreciate that. Just a note on Sherwood, one of the advantages of BRT is you could have local service originating in Sherwood that essentially fed into the BRT corridor and exclusive right-of-way, right? Because I mean, the beauty of BRT is you can kind of have split ends, right? And then, but by the time you get into the main corridor, then you're on the exclusive right-of-way. So is that actively under consideration for the Sherwood scenario?
So what we learned, you're referring to kind of the hub and spoke alternative that we had, where you would have a local kind of BRT line that you would have an investment in a BRT line that went from Portland to Tigard, and then you could feed in local lines onto that. And that was one of the alternatives that we studied. And what we learned as we modeled that alternative is it's actually not very efficient operationally, because you get a huge amount of congestion in that upper part and a very large number of buses going on the northern section of Barber. And so it doesn't end up serving anyone very effectively. So it would be more effective to have a transfer and have, be able to maintain that a number of buses and a reasonable travel time between in the northern part and serve the southern part with more of a feeder line.
Okay, thank you. So my big question is about the bike ped component. I guess my aspiration is we stop thinking about these as transit corridors and start thinking about them as mobility corridors, and that, at the same time that we open the transit service to Tualatin, we also open, a continuous bicycle facility that goes all the way from Tualatin into Portland with, high quality, low stress connections. Are we on a path to achieve that we could, open both kinds of service at the same time, or also a trail that if somebody was motivated to walk all that way, they could, so that, we have all three active transportation modes served in one corridor, as opposed to, I guess what I fear is happening is we're going to piece together a bunch of segments in the bikeway network and call it a corridor, but it won't really achieve the kind of quality that at least I aspire to.
I guess I'd hope that we would not be piecing things together, but we'd be, that we would be, as we move forward, and it might be that one reason we need to go into a refinement phase is that we do have a lot of projects that maybe when you piece them together, it doesn't make the cohesive whole that we're looking for, but we have the opportunity, especially with the regional active transportation plan, to try and address all of these needs together. And I actually think it's quite possible that we might be able to have complete corridors for pedestrians or bicycles long before we'd have a complete corridor for transit. So that's part of what we're hoping to accomplish by continuing to integrate these pieces in a way that we haven't before. It's hard. It's a lot of work to try and keep all of these different elements together, but that's our aim.
I guess the other advantage of that I would point out is that, as I understand it, the FTA is changing the rules so that bike and ped projects within a fairly generous radius of high-capacity transit projects can be eligible in the match. So it creates a new funding strategy, because normally we don't get federal match for our bike and ped projects, but within the envelope of the transit corridor, that opportunity is emerging. So I hope we have a coordinated strategy on how we do that to maximize our leverage on the funding.
So that's an advantage of packaging.
Right. Yep. Thank you.
Well, just to follow up on that.
And then we'll go to you.
There's a regional trail plan that Mel Huey at Metro and a lot of other folks have been involved in creating. Are those potential bike ped, multi-use trails part of that concept?
Yes, they are. We had people from our sustainability center who have been involved in the parks and trails system planning as part of the Southwest Corridor team, and so those trails are part of this.
Great.
And the map that is online is a nice illustration of that regional system and what the potential is.
Great.
It's all there.
Karen?
So my question is about the $500 million worth of 81 projects. And so that's a really gigantic price tag, to me anyway. What percentage do you think of that $500 million would rest with the city of Portland?
Well, that depends on which projects. Those are the roadway and active transportation projects on the list. And
Right.
so it depends on how many of those projects the city of Portland chooses to implement and pay for. So there's no there's no funding commitment in having these projects on the list. It's really trying to, I guess one way I like to think about this list is it's actually it's a potential fundraising tool, that if you have a corridor-wide agreement between 8 cities and 2 counties and 3 agencies, that these are important priority projects that support the land use. It's a way to shop those projects around for other funding dollars. No city has all of the money to pay for those projects, or they would likely mostly be done.
Yeah, I guess in looking at just this kind of figure in juxtaposition to how hard it was to get $5.5 million out to East Portland to pave a road that needed to be paved, I just think that if you look at the fact that that's 1% of this total, it's just kind of shocking to me, and that's 11% of the population, and East Portland has 25% of the population, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of parity there. So I'm just kind of wondering, as this goes on, how that price tag gets up or down or whittled around, because it's one city. Serves a lot of people in a lot of areas that have a lot of active transportation needs.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? I just have a couple. You talked about the environmental justice targeted outreach. Can you explain that a little more?
We have been meeting specifically with a number of the organizations that serve communities that minority or lower income populations. We've been meeting with those organizations last month, and we also had some outreach in the fall of last year, trying to figure out the best way to engage them as we move forward. So we've done some translation. We we haven't, we're not sure where the best way is to focus our resources, which are limited in terms of reaching out, but we are making every effort that we can to do so. So we had 2 focus groups last month in June that were aimed at the kind of leadership of different organizations that serve those communities in the Southwest corridor, not just Southwest Portland. And and I'd have to talk to the person who did that to find out exactly what our strategy is for moving forward. But that's what I can tell you right now, is we're trying to reach out.
Okay. Kind of a process question. So before this group makes a vote, will that come back to us, or are we done?
You guys are done.
So,
I have a message for the mayor. Now's the time to send
Now's
that.
the time. Okay, that was because that gets to my second question. On 2 previous slides, you had that the fact that this is moving forward doesn't mean that the RTP or the MTIP, it's not replacing a project or adding a project. It's just putting it on there. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. I guess my concern is equity here, and we've talked about it before, is that there's nothing wrong with this project. Is this the highest priority for Portland as an investment strategy, especially when you look at roads and transit and connections? So it's something that I hope Metro is looking at too, because the impact is out in Southeast, and whether or not that community is able to get transit and really just basically bus service. So, and the road improvements that are being envisioned here, they probably need equal or more out there. So there's a competition, as Karen pointed out, internally in Portland, but I'm hoping Metro has that same lens of equity in looking at this project.
I was just going to say that it's an opportunity for you all, if you want, to either just meet with Josh Alpert, who's the liaison with the mayor for the commission now, and being able to express some of those ideas so that we make sure that the mayor has that. We can do it through a letter. I can do it, individually on your behalf. But however you all want to do that, we could arrange to either have a meeting with Josh, or I can just take the message.
Well, we've discussed, with all respect, we've discussed prioritizing with
Yeah.
the mayor and staff, and continue to be, I think, concerned that things move in priority with funding and so
Okay.
forth. So, but I think we should continue that conversation.
Yeah. Do some of you want to meet directly with Josh and talk?
Yes.
Yeah. So if we,
I think what would be good would to have a direct meeting for those that are interested. Doesn't have to be the whole commission, but to have a face-to-face conversation would be what I would want to do.
Good.
Okay, so the vote is July 22nd.
22nd.
So we can set that up, for next week or something.
week.
I'm sure
Okay.
it'd be pretty easy to do.
Great.
Good.
Okay, great.
thank you.
And can I just add one last thing? So just in the context of the region, so keep in mind, Malou mentioned Southwest is the #1 priority for the region, and then Powell Division is the second priority. So, and we should know any day now whether or not we received a community planning and development grant from Metro to do a similar Barber concept plan for Powell Division. And just keep in mind, so this regional investment in transit is a huge opportunity for us to get those improvements in sidewalks, in bike lanes, and for the economic development piece. So we are trying to do both at the same time. Remember, council had this discussion with the Barber concept plan. We're not choosing between the east or the west. We're not choosing between one child or the other. We can do both, and we will do both. So, I understand your, the desire to keep this elevated, that conversation elevated. I just wanted to remind you of the context a little bit.
Catherine?
So just a quick follow-up to that. You said the one is priority one, one's priority 2 on the list. And can you just explain the thinking, bring me up to speed on why the Southwest for the region is the #1 priority versus the Southeast?
So there were a number of factors. Do you want to answer that?
You can.
It's your last time, Jay.
It is. You know, I could say whatever I think. You know, I can tell you what I really think. No.
I'll fire you. Oh.
So the main, the analysis showed that there was a higher ridership potential. So Southwest Corridor was, I believe it was 28,000 versus 18,000 new riders. So there's a significant differential there in terms of potential ridership for transit. And then the other was, it was political. So, you know, the west side, we have a bunch of mayors out there. We have Washington County who have been historically able to fund transportation projects. So, you know, they're able, the combination of the two, it rose up in Metro's evaluation criteria. You know, and the city supported that. But we were very clear, you know, Powell Division is also our priority. And I think council has been very consistent in saying, you know, we're going to do both. We're not choosing one over the other.
Well, and that's all right, and I will just add that we are doing Powell Division. You know, we're trying to figure out every way we can to move forward on Powell Division as well as Southwest Corridor. But Southwest Corridor is, you know, it continues to be a regional priority. Powell Division, we want to see that move forward as Metro, and we're working as hard as we can to figure out how to make that move forward with the fact that we don't have the funding from the federal government that we used to get to do that work. And so that's why we've been working creatively with Portland and others to figure out how we can do that. So we're trying to keep both things moving forward. And I guess the only other thing I would add is, as we think about equity, we need to think about it from a variety of perspectives. And one of the things to consider is that Tualatin is really a big jobs center. And there are a number of, one of the big issues in the city of Tualatin is the fact that their employers cannot get their employees to Tualatin. It's been very difficult for them. That's one of the big issues that comes up every time we're out there talking in the community in Tualatin. And a number of their employees are trying to come from other parts of the region, and better connections from population centers to that job area will be good, you know, for both places. So there are a lot of ways that we need to think about equity and how we invest our public dollars, which are limited. So I really appreciate your thoughts on that.
So just to follow up on that a little bit, you know, Powell Division is great, but I think what we heard in working on the Portland plan in East Portland is that a north-south frequent service line may be even more important to the community in some ways. And, you know, I don't think that hits Metro's level of planning. That's a TriMet function. So, you know, how do we coordinate, you know, the agenda that Metro drives, where, you know, the mayor of Hillsborough may have a strong opinion, he may not, about a frequent service line on, you know, on 122nd, but we got to get to the TriMet board on that. And you know, do those two processes talk to each other?
Okay. Metro.
Well, but Metro doesn't get into the
TriMet.
frequent service network. That's, they leave that to TriMet, essentially.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Great presentation for your last time.
We'll miss you, Jay.
Oh,
Thank you.
See you around, right?
We're still working a lot of time frame.
All right. We're going to get started on West Hayden Island. Again, this is a work session and recommendation. Eric Ingstrom will be leading the effort. Just as I sent to all of you earlier as a proposed kind of schedule for this component was we'll have introduction and instructions as the starting point. We'll go by amendment. So the first amendment would be the July 3rd amendment, proposed amendment, and discuss that with any additions or deletions and finalize that and take a vote on whether we should add that to the June 13th package. And then we'll move to amendment, the proposed amendment 2, which is the July 8th memo. We'll discuss that, additions, deletions, and then take a vote on whether to add that to, and that gets added to our second vote. And the second vote is about annexation of West Hayden Island. That's kind of a yes, no, and that would be amended if we choose to that one. And then we'll have some time if anybody else wants to have a third, whatever, fourth amendment or motion, we'd take it at that time. So we'd amend each amendment and recommend whether or not to add it to the package, and then we'll take. So, Mike, I think for you, you want to amend the First Amendment, that would be done at that time.
After we vote on annexation?
No.
Okay.
No. During, no. So, and then after we've got all the amendments, motions put to bed, we would then, what I'd like to do is have each commissioner kind of get 12 minutes to.
Maximum.
Maximum.
Feel free to use less.
We want to get out of here today. And there's no requirement that you choose to use all 12 minutes, but
And some will.
yeah. But we've, including the community, many people have, close to 100 hours of actual time in the seats here, other meetings and things. And so I think it's important to talk about how you view this, your views, and kind of have that. And then at the end, we'd have a vote on the West Hayden Island proposed draft in response to City Council. And then we will have a second vote on the annexation of West Hayden Island. And then if we have any other votes we need to take at that time, we'll take them, and we will conclude. So Eric, you want to get started?
Thank you. For the record, my name is Eric Engstrom with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I want to echo Susan's thank you to the time you've spent on this. I think we're up to 12 or 13 different meeting times with you all on this project, a lot of which was most of your meeting. So thank you again for the time. I'm just going to briefly walk through what's in front of you. Andre covered some of it, but by way of reminder, the first thing that you have in front of you is the June draft, which incorporates the amendments that you all voted on in your May 28th work session, and then has a cover on top of it which describes that. And so if you're referring to either the June 18th or June 19th, that's that package. So that's the base package, which amendments are based on. And then Andre mentioned the July 3rd and July 8th memos, which each outline a set of additional amendments. And so I'll just briefly talk a little bit about that and outline what's in those, and then I'll turn it back over to Andre to start that discussion. The July 3rd memo was crafted based on direction from the commission leadership to try and address remaining amendments that you had in response to your final work session. It includes a couple things. One is some additional amendments related to the truck cap and the stronger language around emissions reduction related to trucks. And so it amends both the IGA as well as the sustainability vision attachment to the IGA. And again, the point of that piece is to strengthen the statement about reduction of truck emissions to reduce impact. And that's the general theme of this whole package, is outlining a variety of ways where you could reduce the impact and therefore reduce the extent of mitigation owed in the end. The second piece there, or the second and third piece rather, is a similar statement around floodplain and forest actions, which talks about ways one could reduce impact and therefore clarify that if impact was reduced, that the amount owed on the mitigation could be correspondingly reduced. The next section of that memo talks about the tribal section, and just there was a request from the commission to name the tribes, and so that was added as an amendment there. There was also a request to name the partnerships. In the agreement at the end, there's a table that outlines the financial responsibilities of different parties in the agreement by way of summary. It's part of the financial subsection of the agreement. And we've added a column to that chart essentially that lists some of the potential partners so that that's clear. We're not being vague about that. Then attached to that memo was also a chart that just summarizes the potential cost implications of those amendments and and there are two things going on in that chart. One is what opportunities the staff believes are available for partnerships and not necessarily saving money, but partnerships that have an effect on what the port ultimately pays. The second part of that was what savings might be come around with some of those reductions in mitigation if the impact was reduced. And so that just summarizes our assessment of that situation. I should mention before going into the next memo, Commissioner Baugh noted that this isn't a hearing, so you should, as you're discussing, unless you're prepared to listen to a whole lot of people, you shouldn't call for testimony or anything like that. But we do have a couple technical staff available to answer questions about these memos since they're coming to you since your last work session. So in addition to myself and my staff, Mindy Brooks and Phil Namany and Rachel Hoy, Mike Rosen is available from the Bureau of Environmental Services, and Bob Hillier from the Bureau of Transportation. Just we're aware that some of the conversation you may have about these amendments will relate to some of those topics, and so we want it to be clear who's available. The second memo is the one dated July 8th, and basically this is in response to commission questions last week about the implication of the CRC funding situation on your decision here. And so we've tried to use this memo to outline, one, give you some links to what the studies that we have done show and what information exists in our record that talks about those transportation issues. Second, to offer some possible language that you will obviously have to discuss in terms of potential responses to that funding decision. So I have no doubt that that will be part of your discussion today, but that was the intent of the memo, is to respond to your questions that were coming in through email last week after the Washington State decision.
Thank you, Eric. I think what I'd like to do is ask Mike Rosen to come up. And then if we have questions on this as is proposed, or before we start amending it, we need to adopt it, and then we can amend what we've adopted for, I think, in terms of process, so that we have a basis to amend the amendment. So questions to Mike Rosen relative to, or Eric, relative to the July 2nd memo, or a discussion? Mike?
Sure, kick it off. Yeah, I know I've communicated to folks on the commission my concern about the proposal to look at the potential for retention of floodplain within the 300-acre footprint and the proposed 50 acres of contiguous forest. And actually, I just realized that what all that means is that there would be a 50-acre chunk of forest left, potentially, depending on the design. And linking that to giving credit to that for the mitigation for loss of ecosystem function in the floodplain, and retaining a patch of forest in the middle of an industrial area does not, it doesn't pass the laugh test, in my opinion. And I will propose some language that I think gets at the spirit of what the commission is trying to do with regard to costs of preparation. But I'd like some feedback from Bureau of Environmental Services, from Mike, regarding the efficacy of protecting some floodplain that is functionally the importance The issue that we've been trying to address with floodplains is not flood storage, not flood capacity. It's ecosystem function. And the fact of the matter is, it's the dynamic between the hydrology and the vegetation and the landscape that yields ecological function. And I don't see how giving credit to allowing for flood storage achieves what we said we wanted to achieve, which is to mitigate for loss of ecosystem function. So I don't know if, Mike, you want to comment on that or not.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my understanding of the proposal is that the concept, which we agree with, is that avoidance of impact to habitat is the best way to minimize mitigation. And in this case, the avoidance that's proposed is to attempt to protect another 50 acres of forest, and that forest would be within the rail loop. And as such...
And not contiguous with the 500 acre.
Well, my understanding is there's a perspective that it would be contiguous, but let me just comment on it generally. So at least it would, and to the extent that the rail loop is adjacent to the remaining forest, I think the concept was that the 50 acres within the rail loop would be contiguous, and that's definitely subject to interpretation, particularly along the lines of whether that 50 acres of forest is impaired and would function as 50 acres of forest that was not in an industrial area. But in addition to that, I think the proposal was because that we could also, so that's about a third of the forest, an additional third of the 150 to 170 acres that would have been removed within the rail loop, protected or retained. And then my understanding was, in addition to that, there would be less filling. So I do agree that it's not just about balance, cut, and fill. It's about the floodplain function and whether there would be less additional ecological functions as a result of the floodplain. My understanding is that that would be possible because we would elevate the railroad in the vicinity of that additional 50 acres of forest. So when we commented on it, additionally, the question that we were asked is, would there be value in an additional 50 acres of forest being protected? And we said yes. And we essentially referred to the methodology we use to assess forest impacts. As the discussion started to ramp up yesterday, the question became, what would be the habitat value protected if those 50 acres of forest were within the rail loop, which means within the industrial area, and in close proximity to the 500 acres. And what I said in an email yesterday basically was, and this was based on discussion with the same staff that developed the methodology to assess the impacts to forest and wetlands and shallow water habitat, was that it seems to us fairly obvious that that forest would be surrounded by an industrial area and, you know, would be subject to significant impacts from that industrial area. And this was noted pretty succinctly by Mike: lights, sound, activities. I mean, as I was thinking about this, there probably is even some obvious conflicts between, or you'd have to maintain some sort of barrier between the forest, some physical barrier probably between the forest and the industrial area. But in any event, our conclusion is that the concept of avoidance is absolutely a good concept to follow. The specifics that we know of in this case suggest to us that it isn't likely to produce a significant amount of reduction in habitat impact to be valuable. That said, we don't have the details. We're speculating about how it could work, but based on what we know now, it's not something I would recommend. Now, as an alternative, what the staff said, and I agree with, if the 50 acres of forest were to be protected outside the rail loop, meaning the orientation of the rail loop was reduced in some way, that would be significantly different because we would have contiguous forest, an additional 50 acres of contiguous forest that wouldn't be adversely impacted by the industrial activities. But that sort of gets us back to a major assumption we've been operating under for 2 years, that this is the rail loop. And we have in the past made decisions about the orientation of the rail loop. I remember one specifically where we talked about moving the rail loop south to protect forest, but we decided not to because of the impacts to principally shallow water habitat and infrastructure like utilities. So does that help?
What about floodplain?
Yeah, and the question for you, the question is, does minimizing the amount of fill by 50 acres restore some some proportional ecological function? I think that's a complicated question too. Am I getting that right? And I think that what the staff thinks is, again, what I would say, avoidance is absolutely the way to go. If we're really down to the details of saying this is a preferred alternative because it's going to achieve effective protection of habitat and a reduction in costs, on the surface, our initial reaction based on what we know is it won't achieve that. If you want us to do a more detailed analysis, we could do that. But, you know, so that's where we are.
Catherine?
Thanks.
So what I'm trying to understand is it seems to me in reading this that it's saying this is just an option that can be
Right.
further studied.
Right.
But it still needs to go through all of the analysis to meet the performance standards that are referenced, and it talks about the different paragraphs and the equivalent ecological function. So
Right.
by putting it in here, it's not saying it's going to work. It's not saying it's going to be a one-to-one swap. It's just saying, if I'm understanding correctly, that's what I guess what I'm looking for, that this is an option to be studied down the line. Is that correct?
Right, that's my understanding. And that flexibility, I mean, I've had discussions with staff about that as well. I think that flexibility exists. One of the things that we wanted to build in as a principle that I think this amendment tries to push forward is, here's what we think is a feasible plan for mitigation, but you can create other efficiencies in the proximity of the mitigation, in mixing and matching of forest and wetlands and shallow water habitat that will provide additional habitat lift or ecological lift that could reduce costs, and it really needs to be based on performance. What we're saying is, here's the details of what we've analyzed over, I'd say, at least a year or a year and a half, and we believe that that achieves the 110%.
Yeah, and the reason that I have submitted another potential amendment is that, given all the uncertainties we just heard about, why would we want to leave this in? And why not look at another option, which is we've discussed among ourselves that there are organizations, don't want to name a specific one, but we know there's one that does a lot of work on the lower Columbia River, that any potential savings that might come from economies of scale, not by putting in $1 million or $2 million, but actually adhering to the outcomes that we say we want, makes a hell of a lot more sense than some floodplain retention and a 50-acre chunk of forest in the middle of an industrial site. I mean, that's my point.
Chris?
So-
And then we'll get to Eric.
A couple of questions that fall between Mike and Eric, so whoever feels best able to field these, go for it. So this language presents an option to retain some ecological function inside the rail loop. Do we need new language to do that, or would the existing language of the agreement include that possibility?
Well, first thing I would clarify is that the proposal that we put in the memo doesn't say inside the rail loop, it says contiguous. And so I realize that's perhaps a semantic discussion worth debating, but we did place some importance on the word contiguous. I think Mike Rosen and I more or less agree on this. What he said is accurate, really reflects BPS's staff too, so.
Do we need new language to make this possible, or would this approach still be pursuable under the existing language?
The framework in the existing IGA does provide a reference to the methodology that we use. So I think the existing IGA gives you some flexibility before this amendment. My understanding of this, the intent of this is to just make it extra clear that that flexibility exists. But I think you could, if the impact is reduced, with or without this amendment, and Mike, feel free to weigh in, but I think the city's framework for how you calculate how much mitigation is enough is detailed enough that you could recalculate with a lower impact.
Okay,
Right.
and if we were to pursue this approach in the future, somebody has to decide if it's good enough mitigation, and I assume that happens as part of the NEPA process. Who would be the ultimate decision maker to say how much ecological function you get out of this approach if it were pursued?
The process there is through the administration of the IGA. So the decision makers responsible for administering the IGA would have to determine that, and BES would obviously be receiving reports on what the final plan was, and there would have to be an agreement reached that was the satisfaction of that agreement.
Okay. And then I assume, to the extent that this does take up part of the footprint of the industrial zoning, the port may have trade-offs about whether they can have a mineral storage bunker or, an auto customization plant as part of the terminal facility. Would it actually reduce the credit we could take for the industrial land supply by 50 acres if we do this 50 acres?
Yes, probably.
So, it seems like we lose valuable industrial acreage and we get poor quality ecosystem function out of it. It just seems like a strange trade-off to me, but I'll leave it there for now. Howard?
I'm confused and a little bit put aside here. I'd like to understand what the two options are before us. One, if I understand the two dimension, is to build an elevated railway with forests that would continue to exist below it. And the other is some other alternative you proposed. Is that true in this amendment? I'm just kind of confused about what we're talking about. Because in two-dimensional conversation, continuing forests under a railway sounds to me like a disaster when you look at it in 3 dimensions.
Thank you.
There's nothing that's in here that talks about an elevated railway or the exact.
Yeah, you're making assumptions about how that would be
Yeah,
achieved.
exactly.
Well, then tell me what we're looking at here.
We were fairly generic there. I mean, that might be one way. You could redesign the rail loop if we find that there's a different geometry that works in the future. I think it's introducing the possibility of reducing that impact. I think Mike accurately said that the most valuable outcome would be is if you found a way to have that forest not on the other side of the rail loop, if there was some way to do that. We didn't get into, with this amendment, trying to redesign the rail loop to figure out how that would be done. It was a more abstract discussion of if you are able to do that in the future and reduce the footprint by 50 acres, this is what it would do to the cost and the mitigation. We agree that preserving it inside the rail loop and elevating the rail loop may not be, we're skeptical of that.
So that's not part of the amendment. It's just a possibility that will have a contiguousness around forest mitigation.
Yeah, I think the conversation is pointing out that one person's definition of contiguous is different than some others, and we have to sort that out.
Don, then Mike, and then
Just a couple thoughts. 50 acres is a large site. It's 50 downtown Portland blocks. It's probably larger than the Portland State campus. So, to characterize it as a small kind of piecemeal approach, I don't think is appropriate. And the reason I'm in favor of leaving this idea in is that I'd like a final design team to have more flexibility, to explore alternatives. You know, water could flow under the rail if it was on a structure. The structure itself would probably be about, 40 or 50-foot swath through the woods. The woods wouldn't be completely contiguous, but I would imagine birds can fly 50 feet from one tree to the other. So there would be some value. And obviously that value needs to be characterized when more details are in place. And the credit for that 50 acres needs to be defined at that time. I guess my thought is, I didn't want to, the rail defines basically what's needed functionally for the industrial aspects of the property. If they choose to do this kind of inboard tree preserve area and low area, and they can demonstrate that it works during a latter design phase, I think they should have that opportunity to be ingenious about how this is proposed. The idea of a structure, an elevated rail, is expensive, compared to putting a fill bank in and putting the rail on fill, obviously. And it may prove to be something that's not feasible in the long run. But I'd like there to be the option to explore it, because the mitigation is expensive too. And this might be an effective way to kind of articulate the design of that industrial facility in the future when they get down to it. So, I agree with, this isn't perfect, but it's 50 acres of treed area. And some of the more mature ash trees might be in that area. So that's kind of why I'm intrigued by this prospect, and I'd like to kind of keep it on the table with the thought that a critical review is done of it relevant to the credit that should be allocated for that floodplain and forest area preservation at a later date. So that's my general thought about it.
Mike, and then we're going to do one more, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't argue that against the fact that avoidance is the first thing you want to do. So I absolutely agree with staff on that. None of what you discussed on really relates to my concern about floodplains, however. And I thought I heard Eric's response, Catherine's question about flexibility, is even without this language, there's plenty of flexibility available in this language, correct? Without specifying the 50 acres of forest in the floodplain, correct?
Yeah, both the whole environmental section of the agreement contains language that references the methodology that we use to arrive at how much mitigation is enough. And there's a pretty explicit statement about adaptive management, and if circumstances, either science or the impact acreage calculation changes, you could go back and redo that and figure that out. So I think there's some of that in there. Our understanding of this amendment was just to be even more clear about that.
There's several places in the IGA where we have taken to provide more clarity and more instruction to people who will be making decisions in the future, and this is a good example of one. So there's many places where we could take some words out because there's enough in there to provide enough of a box to make decisions in, and so the purpose of this amendment is to provide the possibility of more clarity. It doesn't mean you couldn't do it without it, but it does provide some direction, and so that's more what you're agreeing or disagreeing on.
So here's the critical question for me then. In 5541, it specifies 100-year, 30-year, 10-year, and 2-year flood events. And my question is, through this future flexibility and analysis, the fact of the matter is that has to be achieved, that objective. Is everybody in agreement with that?
I think, Mike, when I look at this, and just the way I look at it is, we did not move the goalposts in terms of what needs to be achieved.
That's my concern, is that we are moving the goalposts.
We are not moving the goalposts of what needs to be achieved. Under 5541, you still have to achieve, the analysis is still intact of what needs to be done to credit, and the avoidance that's, whether you have this language or not, if they avoid, there's still a calculation that BES has to do, or someone has to do in the future to do an analysis of how much that mitigation credit is worth. And so if they don't do any avoidance, there's still a calculation. Someone in the future is going to do that calculation and make that determination. We've not moved the goalposts. We've not said we want a different goal. We've just said, in terms of clarification, this is an option. We've not even said 50 acres. We've not said it's going to be elevated. It was, if they did something like that, would there be a way to get them to provide flexibility to get credit under the current methodology that is in 5541? And it was, according to Eric, you already have the methodology today. We're just saying, if you do this, or you do some other creative method that we don't know today, there's a methodology to get them credit. Howard, and then we're going to be.
One last question.
One last.
Eric, why did you take out the tribal government's interest in discussions relating to environmental mitigation?
Which are you pointing to?
I'm looking at 7.2 under,
What page? Oh, page 6?
yeah.
That isn't a removal, that's an addition.
Oh, and I'm sorry, thank you, good, good.
Other last questions real quick?
That's good.
So is there a motion to, the way this will work, we'll have a motion to accept this, we'll vote, and then if we want to have any amendments to this memo, we'll do that next. So is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second? Second. Julie, can you call a vote?
Ray,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Hout,
Yeah.
Tobias,
Yes.
Oxman,
Yes.
Schultz,
Yes.
Shapiro,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Valdez.
Yes.
Law.
Yes. That's been adopted and will be amended to the June 2013 amended proposal draft. Are there amendments to this amendment that was just adopted?
No,
Really?
I'm not stupid.
Can I ask Commissioner Houck a question? Mike, I understood that the language you had suggested about cost reduction through partnership here, I mean, that's not contradictory to what we just adopted. Would it be a useful addition?
No, I don't think it's worth it, frankly. It's so obvious. That's infinitely more obvious and likely to succeed than what we just discussed. But if the court's smart, they'll be looking at LCREP and other potential partners to do exactly what I outlined in my amendment. Yeah, it really is ironic that we're talking about, taking potentially 50 acres out of what we've been told is that the minimum footprint is 300 acres, and now it's 250, or maybe even less than that, is illogical to me, but that's fine. We did it. Let's move on.
Well, there's the ability to do it.
Yeah.
There are probably better solutions,
Right.
right?
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Move on. So there are no amendments. It stands. July 8th memo will be the next one. This is relative to CRC, for lack of a better term. There's a recommendation, staff recommendation, and options for our consideration. Discussion on this.
Andre, can I make one clarification to
Yes.
this? There's been some questions that we've received since this that just lead me to believe that one part is murky that ought to be cleared up. The language that talks about the interim zone, using a placeholder zone in the meantime before the transportation solution, for lack of a better term, is spelled out. We wanted to be clear that the intent there was that we're talking about the industrial footprint area, so that the open space zoning could potentially go into effect with the annexation, that it was when we talk about that gap, we're talking about the industrial footprint of the 300 acres. Our language was murky on that point.
That was my main question.
Yeah.
The other thing to just clarify is that we are talking about a city zone that would be the interim zone. There was some confusion about whether we were talking about county zoning, but it's a city farm forest zone that would be used as the placeholder.
Okay, we'll start with Mike, Karen, Don.
Well, that last point's an important one for me as well, because I know it's been stated on numerous occasions that, you know, under the county zoning, you could go in and cut the forest, farm and forest. Under the city zoning, is the city zoning any different than that? What's precluded under the city zoning for farm and forest?
I think the operative part here is the IGA clause that governs this would still remain the same. There still is a clause in the draft IGA that says that the port wouldn't cut or fill outside the dredge management area until the permitting process later was through. So there's a protection against that in the IGA explicitly. Okay. And that was true, and that was a concern under the previous proposal as well as this new one.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Karen?
So my request would be to just take a minute, because this came out yesterday, and I'd like a little explanation more than just us going and asking questions right away to these recommendations here. I understand these less than I do the July 3rd. So please take us through it.
So what I'll start with is at the end of the document, there's a number of links related to transportation studies that you already have in the record that just are the source material for where we're getting the assessment. We've summarized some of the key points in the intro language about the amount of traffic, the percent that's contributed by the port, and probably the key finding is that without the CRC, there's a failure of intersections in the vicinity of the interchange. In other words, traffic isn't moving without that. There are a couple options that we've put for your consideration that would be a way to address that while still moving forward with the annexation. One is to essentially take traffic away from the existing situation as you put new traffic on there. So back when we were talking about purchasing parkland on the island, if you buy land that was in commercial or industrial zoning, take it out of circulation temporarily, you could buy essentially a chunk of traffic that would allow you to put some new traffic on the street. The second approach, and probably the more important piece, is that we also have a tool in the fact that the city has two maps. We have a comprehensive plan map and a zone map, which are the purpose of the comprehensive plan map is to illustrate the long-term 20-year intent. And the zoning is often the same, but sometimes different based on an infrastructure shortfall that may be perceived as a short-term subject to a planning process. So we've done this. Other examples that we've used this approach on are, for example, when we did the Albina plan, we put some initial zone comprehensive plan designations in place along the then future Yellow Line corridor. But we didn't actually change the zoning until the yellow line was on the ground and we knew exactly where it was. And that's not an annexation, but it's analogous to our ability to have a second control over that. So the idea here is that you could withhold the zoning on the industrial footprint until such time as you go back and work out the transportation at that interchange. And for context, the governor has already directed ODOT to begin work to look at how we can develop an alternate package on our side of the border of trying to improve the safety and congestion issues at those interchanges. So it's following that lead that this approach is suggested, because it would buy you the time to finish that state-led process.
And the governor has already asked for that.
In the statement that happened a week ago on the Washington vote, there was a statement about that, and we'll be, of course, working with ODOT to figure out what that means for us. And as I said before, Bob Hillier from PBOT is also here if there are questions about the technical conclusions.
Okay. Chris? Or Don, did you?
I think Don was ahead of me.
I'll ask a couple of questions. One, you're kind of making a comp plan change and then using holding zones for zoning. Will the 500 acre, 300 acre delineation between industrial and open space, will it be achieved with those comp plan designations?
Yeah, and yes, that's the intent, is you'd spell out that long-term blueprint. You would just have a holding zone on one part of it until the transportation was available.
Okay. My other question is regarding traffic, and maybe I'll come back to that later. Like
Chris?
If we could have Bob come up, I think that would be helpful for my questions.
Yeah, same here.
So I've been a conflicted guy this week. On the one hand, I'm pinching myself because I can't quite believe that the CRC is really dead. On the other hand, it could not have happened at a worse moment for our planning process here. So you know, my brain is having trouble struggling with it.
Or the best.
So Bob, the CRC is in the Regional Transportation Plan, which is the model that we use for everything we plan here, right? When does that come out, and when do we start to have the ability to model how the transportation network will work without it?
What does what come out, the RTP?
When does the CRC come out of the RTP, and how do we start modeling the world without the CRC in our plans?
Yeah, well, I'm going to probably have a real consistent answer here. We really don't know at this point. I mean, the non-decision from the Washington legislature was just last week. Right now, the CRC is in the adopted RTP. The city's plan, our TSP has to be consistent with the RTP. So there's a lot of questions involving this issue right now. So no, we don't have an answer of when or if that'll be removed or changed and in what form.
So do we know if current zoning under the Hayden Island plan that this commission passed shortly before I became a member actually works without the CRC? I mean, are we going to have to downzone parts of the island to get compliant with the new scenario?
All the assumptions that we did with the PBOT did with the Hayden Island development, we assumed the CRC. We also assumed the adopted Hayden Island plan and densities and lane uses involved with that, and the CRC network. So all our analysis is based on that future network with the CRC improvements in place. So it's not just the Hayden Island interchanges. It's the light rail. It's improvements to the main line of I-5. It's the Hayden Island, it's the Marine Drive interchange improvements. It's the local arterial bridge. So without that, I mean, we have no way of knowing what the future would hold. I know there was a memo that was part of your packet that staff prepared in February asking that question, what happens if the CRC is not approved? And one of the things you probably have to look at is looking at the adopted Hayden Island plan.
So the next person who comes in for a building permit on Hayden Island, what are they going to get told?
Land use question?
Luckily, that's not my call, but we don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay, so obviously there's a huge amount of uncertainty here. You know, my concern is that what we need is a new access vision for the island, and I hope the city will take a leadership role in developing that rather than waiting for ODOT to bring options to us, because ODOT bringing options has not traditionally, from my point of view, been a successful strategy for Portland land use. But in the interim, what I wouldn't want to see is for the port to go to the head of the line to get a solution, and the rest of the island has to keep waiting to figure out how we're going to solve access for them. So from that point of view, I much prefer option one, which is to decouple the comprehensive plan and zoning designations, because that leaves the port waiting for the island-wide solution, or at least for everybody else to figure out what's going on, as opposed to trying to buy their way out of it by acquiring some property somewhere and changing the zoning. So of the two options here, I have a strong preference for number one.
Don, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. I think I want to tag on to Chris's thoughts about needing a new access vision for the island. Bob?
Does your microphone work?
I hope so. Actually, maybe, can you hear me?
Get it closer.
Yeah.
I'm going to tag on to what Commissioner Smith said about a need for a new access vision for the island, because not only does this impact West Hayden Island, but also the adopted Hayden Island plan, which a lot of people in attendance worked hard on. what I'm wondering is, are there any realistic measures to avoid kind of the level of service F, short of building a CRC on the island, given the current land use and zoning, and given the addition of West Hayden Island? I know that's a tough question, Bob, but, is it possible to come up with measures that address this? Because it seems like if we take the approach that Chris just advocated, decoupling the comp plan and zoning designations, which has some good aspects, part of that is going to be kind of working on what's feasible to improve circulation and access at intersections to elevate the level of service needed. I don't know. What can you do? Do you build surface bridges? I don't know.
And there's no answer right now because, no analysis has been done. We don't know what this means. The analysis that was in your packet from SCJ, they did look at, what the interchange would look like without a CRC. And in 2030, like I said, there's around 3 intersections that fail. And again, that's with the existing adopted plans in place, the Hayden Island plan. So if something else can be done, we don't know that. No one has put pen to paper or analyzed that yet.
Okay, thanks.
Howard?
I want to understand the amendment, which I believe to be that we will, if we do this, keep control of Hayden Island in the city by passing the measure. That by putting it in the comp plan, we are actually just delaying a little bit of time to study the whole issue as a bigger question than just the one we're looking at. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a step. Under this amendment, you would be annexing or recommending annexing.
Yeah.
But upon annexation, the comp plan map would go into effect, and a placeholder set of zoning would go into effect.
It doesn't automatically do any change of zoning. It just accepts that the city will, in fact.
It does change the zoning from county. Currently, the whole island is county farm forest. Upon annexation, the open space would be zoned open space, and the eventual industrial footprint would, for the time being, be zoned farm forest, equivalent to what it is today, but with the county or the city version of that zone.
City version. So,
and then
what
later,
it really does is delay our decision to make it more inclusive in the comp plan.
later, what would happen is you'd have to change that farm forest zone to an industrial zone.
Which we could do.
One of the approval criterion for doing that is adequacy of services. So you'd review the transportation situation at that time.
Catherine?
Quick question, just piggybacking. So why not make all of it just open space? And then let the piece that's, going to become would become, let's say, the terminal, then get changed at that time?
In the comp plan, there's a fairly complicated table of what zones are allowed to be designated within what categories of comprehensive plan. And so I think it's an issue of even though you have an interim zone, you want that interim zone to be part of the continuum that leads to that type of thing. And farm forest is a conceivable zone with an industrial sanctuary comprehensive plan designation. Open space is a whole different category. And so I don't think it's a different category of comp plan designation, so it creates a conflict there.
Gary, then Irma.
Eric, a couple of related questions. Is there a reason not to take the area that's ultimately envisioned as open space and designate that as open space now as part of the interim?
That's what we're suggesting, yeah.
Okay, so that's what.
And that was the clarification I made earlier, is that the language was vague on that point. And so I'm clarifying that the interim zone would only be applied to the industrial footprint area.
Okay, so the 300 goes with farm and forest, and the 500 goes to open.
Yeah, and it gives people a sense of where we're going then, because when you look at a zoning map, what you'd see is the farm forest zone, but then in parentheses, you'd see the industrial sanctuary comprehensive plan designation. It sends a clear signal what the intent is.
Okay, thanks. And then you had stated earlier that there are already prohibitions within the IGA on the port doing anything with the existing forest until it's zoned industrial. Where in the proposed IGA do those things sit?
I will go ahead and find that for you. memorized.
In
them.
section 5.6.6, which is on page 135.
I'm sorry,
Impressed at how
6
quickly he did that.
I know this document. 5.6.6, page 135. I also knew this question was coming up, Chris. There's a clause that says timing of development and FEMA consultation. So the original purpose of this was to make sure that fill didn't happen outside the dredge management area until there was future consultation with federal permitting. But it happens to serve this, it serves the same purpose, is that it forces a delay in any action outside the dredge management area until there's until that later permitting process.
Okay, thanks.
Irma, and then Karen.
I was going to say, I mean, maybe this is pretty obvious. I mean, at least for some of us sitting on the commission, we always knew that CRC wasn't something that was apparently going to happen or not happen. It was going to be a vote. So I'm assuming whether West Hayden Island is annexed or not, there's still development going on the island. There's a major mall remodel going on right now. I was there over the weekend. There's so much activity and development going on. So just thinking on, forget about what we're here testifying on, just common sense. If you look at the site, there's going to be improvements on infrastructure and stops. Isn't that a correct assessment?
The improvements that are.
There's going to be improvements going on, whether the island is annexed or not. You're going to make street improvements on the island just with the development that's going on right now there.
Well, there might be city street improvements, but we're talking about the interchange improvements with ODOT, the I-5 interchange, and that's where the failure takes place without a CRC, so.
But there's still going to be, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is the discussions are not going to end. You're still going to have conversations. What happens now that CRC is not going to take place and that, you know.
We just don't know what those discussions are, what the outcomes will be, and
But
what.
they're going to happen. I mean, it's my point.
If you're asking whether we have a problem without this, if this project didn't exist, would we still have a problem? The answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Transportation planning rule puts an obligation on us not to do zoning where we don't know how we're going to provide the transportation, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the comp plan designation is a good idea.
That's why
Right.
Karen?
My only question was, yes, my microphone worked. Whoa. Yes, I do have a teacher's license. So Commissioner Smith said, I far like option 1 over option 2. I didn't know these were options. So are these like, would I see these as recommendations that you can actually have a 1 and 2? Or are these a 1 exclusive of 2?
They're not exclusive. You could do both, or you could choose one or the other.
Okay, that's the clarification I needed.
So, are there any other questions? I'm going to make a couple comments and then.
I'm ready on a motion when you need one.
Oh, okay. I just want to make a couple of comments about this. It seems to me this is our choice here. I agree, option 1 seems to be the best option versus 2, and then the associated language to accompany it. But this is a choice between whether or not the city of Portland keeps West Hayden Island in its ballpark, or it allows West Hayden Island, if we don't annex it in, to be not in our ballpark and allow the port to chase some other alternative. And that could be going to the legislature without looking at the question of how do you solve this bigger problem on West Hayden Island? There are businesses, as Irma pointed out, they're already building, a lot of things are happening. We need the port in the room talking to us about, as part of that solution, not exiting and having a separate conversation on a solution potentially. Not saying they would, but they could. And so I think it's good to keep them in the ballpark working with us. And by annexing it, keeping it farmland, it solves that problem. And there's no question this is going to be a long-term solution. It's going to take years to get to how do you solve it and where does the money come from and a lot of things. But what West Hayden Island is a long-term solution also. So it may actually track together. Is there a motion?
So I move the staff recommendation, the July 8th memo regarding the CRC with option 1 only.
Great. Julie, vote. Karen?
I know. I'm not asleep.
We're not voting on the annexation, just
No,
this amendment.
I know, but we've now taken these two considerations and made them options, so I'm being asked to choose one over the other. Okay, aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Hauk,
Aye.
Tobias,
Yes.
Oxman,
Yes.
Schultz,
Aye.
Shapiro, Smith,
Aye.
Valdez,
Aye.
Baugh.
Aye. Motion passes. Are there any other amendments, questions, motions before we get into just our, thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. So are there any other questions, motions? And if not, well, Gary?
Yeah, not a motion or an amendment, but I have a couple of questions on the annexation cost chart and specifically on the ranges. Are those things that you would like me to address during my time, or just bring them up now?
Why don't you ask Eric right now, and then we'll, if they're quick.
I don't know how quick they are. I guess, Eric, what I was looking for primarily, and I'm being kind of narrow from a health perspective, the HIA follow-up, I believe in May we voted for an amount up to, it was 13.8 plus there was some other funds added in there. And now there's a range of 5 million to 17.2, which represents potentially a 70% reduction over the up to amount that we had identified before. So I'm wondering about where does the 5 million come from? What's the rationale?
What we did essentially is, before your May amendment, the 13-some million dollars existed in a separate bin essentially for parks. And if we understood your amendment correctly, then what you did was take that out of parks and then you put it back into the health. What was already in the health bin was about $1 million for the HIA impact, plus 3.6 for the housing fund, plus some additional change for actually doing the HIA, and so which basically adds up to 5. And when you add that 13 to it is where we came up with the 17. So what we did in the current draft is lump together all the health related, including the housing, into one description, and that's what the 17 represents. So the range just represents the distinction between the minimum without the additional parks and the maximum with the if the whole 13 million from the parks was transferred to that.
So the minimum represents basically it represents a decision not, excuse me, the minimum represents a decision not to bundle all that together, but rather to go back just to the dedicated health. That's what the 5 is?
The 5 was what you had in health originally, and when you take the full 13 million that you added from the parks column, you get to 17.
Okay.
One question, yes.
Was there ever any consideration to bundle the community benefit grant with the community fund, and is there a reason that's decoupled?
We left, I guess that's a policy call, but we left that separate because it was a community controlled. The process for that grant is the community makes recommendations for how it gets spent through the advisory committee, whereas the rest of the fund is explicitly tied to the HIA and is supposed to be responding to public health. And so we I think at the staff level, we felt that it was appropriate to leave discretionary money on the table for essentially good work in the community that wasn't tied to the HIA, and that's what's remaining in the grant fund is still that opportunity for there to be grants that are just simply community driven that are not explicitly just the health. It could be to the health, but there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more community control over the grant than there is in the funds that are in the health. The larger fund are driven from the results of the health impact assessment.
Any other last questions for Eric? You can certainly, during your 12 minutes, ask Eric to come back up. 12 minutes. So we're going to do 12 minutes, and
We have a brief break before we start into the speechifying round.
5 minutes, and then we'll do our 12 minutes. And then 2 hours.
10 times 12.
We already did.
We already did.
Yep, we did.
Passed unanimously. Howard, you voted for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your effort. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
Did you go have coffee? You said to me, you're going to go have coffee with Roman. So what did he say? Believe that shit that we could have that conversation. It's good.
Hey, Vic.
Crazy, right?
Pardon?
We should go. Aw. I love when my daughter-in-law sends me pictures of my grandkids.
I think what we decided.
They're just so cute.
For the stuff that was then designated.
3.
For stuff at 13.8, and the other stuff got lumped into
Yep.
the 17.
Give me a high five.
But there was never a floor.
Oh, well, are you?
That is awesome. Get it done.
Yeah, get her done. Oh, man, at this point. Right? I was going to say, I just can't stick picture. I
Oh, thank you very much.
I thought that number 2's going to happen anyway. So then I'm okay with it, but I don't want to make a choice to say yes when I wanted both of them.
So we got back here and I was like,
Where are all these cars in the room? Yeah, I know.
You worked on it.
But you know, the point sometimes with that, and I've seen it in my own space, is every once in a while, if you just then you feel like they discharged, and then it was just like a normal neighbor for like, we have a 3-minute rule in our neighborhood. But every once in a while, we'll give somebody a lighter, just
I like being able to walk to the store.
you know, like when we can the water hole. I have to fund it. Just has to.
Where do you
days way longer to cry and bitch because first of all, they're beloved. And second of all, really?
Oh, yeah, I have so many friends.
I wrote mine because I didn't.
I live in that apartment. You live on like. Well, you're back. You're better than I am. And yes, you are. You're gonna let him out.
Solicitor attorney.
Way better. Oh, the pizza. I have friends that are on Thompson, but on the other. Yeah, they bought their like. Oh, and it was not as, you know, it's sort of a.
Yeah, it's,
Walk around and see how.
that's the motion right there. I'll see if I can make it bigger.
You're like, really? Fine.
How do you zoom in on this? I'll just make the font bigger.
I'm with you. Well, I didn't understand that. I thought it was blindsided. It's fine except for what happened. He's doing a great job. Is there any discussion about which is that face that? And I don't think there's anything.
Are you gonna just go around and follow people?
I'm just going to start at this end, and we'll go here, and then we'll jump to Gary. And we'll go around and
Great.
I've been
I'll be the last one, and then we're going to vote.
It's just, I'm very black and white. It is.
So, I see.
But I like that.
Drawing my
I was
amendment.
already.
Well, what's that?
I mean, that's the extent of my knowledge. I like that idea.
Thank you, Marianne. Are we?
Interest in this, so she doesn't participate in West Haven Island stuff.
Missing one.
So usually,
I'm serious.
usually the way you do this, city council anyway, before they vote, it's like before each person votes, they
That's never here.
have their say.
Lucky her.
I just thought it'd be easier than yes, and then 10 minutes, then yes, just this, and then we just.
My name began with B.
That's fine. That way, well then we can just vote and go home. Yeah, I'm gonna go this way. We're gonna get started.
That's hysterical, Susan. Funny how that worked out.
Commissioners, we're down to the last 2 hours. Or less.
Or less.
Yeah,
Or less.
Nobody has to take their 12 minutes.
Yeah. So up on the screen is the motions for voting. So you can note those. We're not voting, we're just going to have your comments for up to the 12 minutes. We'll start with Irma, and I will give you the high sign. I think we're done. And try to keep it moving.
Put that timer thing out there and then the bell will go off. People get scared.
They just ignore it.
We're watching the clock.
So what am I
Irma,
doing?
you
I
wanna
wasn't
get
paying
started?
attention. Just kidding.
12 minutes.
Go.
I got 12 minutes? Oh, okay. I am not going to take 12 minutes. I have to say that I love working with all of you. I think we're a fantastic commission. I extremely value Mike and Chris's expertise on transportation and the environment. And Gary, you've been fabulous. I love your input on the health pointers that you've made. I love Don. I think that Don's like our dad, but he kind of brings us back to reality. I think you're younger than Don, so. So, for me, and you guys are going to laugh, I've used this as a really good research tool because I've moved here from Washington, D.C. almost 12 years ago. I absolutely love Portland. I think we're a really smart city. I think we make really smart decisions because of the dialogue that we have. So I took it upon myself to travel
to do research on West Hayden Island. And that seems kind of odd, right, that I would leave Portland to get a feel for what we are proposing. And I went to Seattle, and I walked around their port. And there is such incredible prosperity in Seattle. There's great development, there's walkability, there's things for family, for children, et cetera, et cetera. Then I went to San Francisco, and I just went to San Francisco 2 weeks ago. Again, they have a very prosperous port. So I came back, from San Francisco and thought about our vote and the work we've been doing. And I really think that annexing the island is the right thing to do. I think it's going to be good for our city. I think it's the economic prosperity of our city. We can create a walkable environment, a bikeable environment, protect the environment, protect the birds that we love, protect the green spaces, create a park. And I think that also what's really critical that I think a lot of other cities forget, maybe the ports in San Francisco that I noticed in Seattle, they forget the poor, the working poor. And I think we have a great opportunity with what we're doing that we make sure that, it's funny, we were talking about, Barbara Boulevard, right, and the development in Southwest versus the East Side. We don't want to become that kind of city. We want to be able to incorporate both communities, so there's development on Barbara Boulevard, there's development on Southeast, and I think this is a great opportunity to do something good for the city, for everybody. There was a lot of debate whether the benefits are going to be for the island residents or for the bigger picture. I'd like to, think globally. China's doing really well, whether we want to see that as a positive or a negative. How about making this a positive development for not just the people on the island, the people that are going to have jobs, but tourism that are going to come to our great city and say, what a fantastic place to come and visit, to study, and to really try to model Portland and other parts of the world. So I just think it's a great opportunity. And I think that by keeping the partners involved through the process and putting our stamp on it and our stewardship to continue to stay involved, the current mayor has invited us as commissioners to kind of have a dialogue with him as things move through his office and through the commission. And I think that we should honor that invitation. So I feel, very proud to be a part of this commission, and those are the only points I want to make, and I feel happy that we should move forward on this.
Great. Chris?
Well, I want to start by thanking some people. First and foremost, the staff, who I think have done incredible work to keep us informed and help us answer the questions that we have. I want to thank the community who has stayed engaged through this whole process and kept us honest from all points of view. And I want to thank my fellow commissioners. I can't think of a better group to work through this decision with. So thank you all for your engagement on this. And from a process point of view, I'm much happier with where we are now than where we were in November. So I think taking what we had planned for 3 months turned into 6 to inform ourselves and sort out as much of this as we could. This has been great, and I'm glad we have done that for the community. I think it was the right choice to not move forward at that time. So to get to the substance, to me, the heading for this is making decisions under uncertainty. There are a lot of uncertainties here. How the market for the commodities that these terminals might serve will develop, what the health and environmental impacts will be, what the climate will be and how that will affect this island in 25 or 50 years. And we don't get to avoid those decisions just because there's uncertainty. What we have to do is balance the uncertainty, and I think that's a big part of the challenge of what we're doing here. One of the fundamental questions is whether, in fact, we need new terminals. And I know the community has felt challenged by that, and there are a number of people who feel that we don't. I'm not too concerned about that. I think that the global factors suggest to me that there will be an ongoing pipeline of grain from the North American breadbasket to Asia, and that climate and other factors drive that, and that the Lower Columbia is the logical place for that to get exported from the United States. So I don't really question the need for new terminals. For minerals, for autos, less clear, but for grain, I think that is pretty clear, and you can see the trend. I mean, there have been new grain terminals and reinvestment in grain terminals in Lower Columbia, not necessarily on the port, properties, but in the Lower Columbia in recent years. So I don't have a lot of worry about that. What I do have worry about is where those go and what the impacts they create are. And I'm using as my lens the Portland Plan, which says that we need to balance the economic interests, the environment, and the health of our community. And in the past, those last two, the health of our community and the environment, were not given as much weight. So I think we're in a new context, and what I'm trying to do is balance those uncertainties. So if there's risk on the economic side, there's also we don't treat that more heavily than we treat the risk on the health side or the environmental side. So keeping that in balance and those uncertainties kind of weighing against each other is my context for this. So as we approach this vote, I hope we're going to have a pretty strong consensus around vote number one, because I think it's, since the city council is ultimately the decision maker, we don't know if they're going to say yes or no on the second question. I think it behooves us to have a strong plan for the first question, and I'm happy for the discussions we've had here and our desire to continue refining it even up through today. And I'm hoping for a strong consensus on that. And I think it is important that the port take away the message that we anticipate that to do this correctly, we need partnerships. That the port, there isn't a business model where the port can do this on its own and respect the environment and the health of the community, and that the port has to look beyond its own organization to find partners who can bring the whole package together to do it in a way that makes it work economically and makes it work for the health of our community and the environment. There has to be a big picture view on this, and I think we put together a package that reflects that. Having said that, I still have significant concerns about this project. The first is in our ability to gauge the health impacts and know how to mitigate them. I mean, we have, we can estimate how many air toxics we're going to create. It's more of a guess on what the impact on the specific population that will be on the island in 15 years will be, and to me, it's even murkier what we do to offset that. In the environmental realm, at least we have mitigation formulas, and we can say if we destroy this much habitat, we have to replace it with that much somewhere else, and we can do a calculation that says we get to 110%. I don't have any calculation in front of me that says we can get to 100%, 110% on health, and that disturbs me. I worry that we're planning for this in too small a context. We are the Planning Commission for the City of Portland, and we basically get to make a decision on is there a terminal in Portland or not. I've referenced that I think the market area is really the Lower Columbia, and whether, if we need to have the next grain terminal, whether it's better on West Hayden Island, in Vancouver, or Longview, or Astoria, our analysis process did not attempt to answer that question. Some of us have poked around at that, and I see some data that the community has submitted that suggests to me that maybe Vancouver doesn't work so well. The fact that there are brownfield opportunities in Longview is interesting to me because we don't have to worry about as much environmental impact, but we fundamentally don't know how to answer that question, and I wish there were some governmental body that was set up to say where in the Lower Columbia the next terminal should go. I mean, as we are set up now, we are cities that compete against each other. So the Port of Portland competes against the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Longview. Even if they do some cooperation as well, they're fundamentally in competition, and that makes it hard for us to know what the best place to put the next terminal is. And finally, I worry a lot about climate change, and to me, as we're plotting our strategies for climate resilience, the idea of having this 800 acres undisturbed in one unit seems like a tremendous hole card to keep rather than give up. So I worry if we break it up, and even if we do the environmental mitigation, we'll replace all the parts, but I think the whole is probably still greater than the sum of the parts, and we may never get back to the whole. And for climate resilience, that may be a very important consideration. So that's what's influencing my decision.
Lonnie?
Good afternoon, everyone. I also echo a lot of Chris's concerns and gratitude to the numerous hours that we've spent reading every email, every letter, every 3-minute testimony that came in, and also the work of the staff to really work with us to help us understand the intricacies of all the moving parts and to create a package, the best package that we could come up with given the time constraints. There are a couple of things that I want to share with everyone in terms of how I've approached this, and really I've let my values and where I feel the city of Portland is going and thinking, and the many discussions that I've had with community members who have various opinions about this topic. And to me, I heard very strongly that West Hayden Island is an irreplaceable natural resource. I heard strongly the opposition from the community member or the residents who live there, the tribal nations who oppose development because it infringes on the tribal interest to preserve, protect, and enhance the treaty trust resources and fishing rights. Those came in strong and clear to me. I also heard the need for jobs and economic development in the city of Portland, and sort of balancing how we make this decision, how that'll impact prosperity. So I think about the word prosperity a lot. And to me, it's more than economic prosperity. What I've come away with is the health of our community. The health analysis really impacted me and is impacting my decision today. So if toxic levels are going to triple to 55 times the amount of the state benchmarks, no matter how many jobs we create, we're not going to have people to fill those jobs and resources in our natural environment to sustain a community. So I feel strongly that, you know, even if we have divided opinions on whether or not to annex this, not just in this board, but through the city council, what's paramount to me is the health of the community and the health of our natural resources. We can't be good stewards of the river, the land, and what lives there if we don't put that first, and long before we're gone. So the last point that I want to make is community engagement, ongoing community engagement, and enriched tribal participation. We heard from the tribal nations that they have been involved, although going forward, I think that partnership and that connection needs to be strengthened. And the city has taken steps to create a resolution, but there needs to be more consultation, deeper consultation with both tribal nations and the community. It's obvious that community is very interested in this this topic and this development, and it seems like the advisory group that broke down late in the you know, its deliberations was clearly a symptom of concerns that weren't being addressed. So that needs to be enhanced. That needs to be authentic collaboration and partnership. And I think it's going to be a testament of how Portland can show the rest of the nation how development and prosperity and community can all coexist in the right way, and given how we develop it for future generations. So,
thank you. Don?
My comments will be brief. I've worked on this for, I think, 3 years. And I could be wrong about that. When I first started, Joe Zender said, oh, it'll take about 6 months. And so I really want to thank staff also for their great work on this. And I also want to thank the community, and especially the Islanders. They've represented their district so well throughout this whole process. I was really impressed with their involvement and their constructive involvement. You know, my hope right now is that we're taking a balanced approach on this in terms of the environment and economic development, jobs. And I think we are. I think we're headed in that direction. I've thought about this you know, from a broader perspective, you know, the lower Columbia. And I come right back to, I want it in Portland. Maybe I'm selfish, maybe I'm competitive, but I want it here. I want I want it right here, and I want the jobs created right here. That's my perspective, you know, and I won't apologize for that. Chris is right. You know, there's uncertainty around this right now, and my hoping is that we've kind of put this in place and that there's a certain timing of decisions that occurs with more detailed information as it moves ahead, especially on the health impact analysis. And I think we've set the foundation for that. And the last thing I want to say is I'm glad the Port of Portland owns this property. They've become this kind of attack symbol, I think, during this whole process. That's not fair. I work for a lot of development interests, and I'll tell you what, all those interests I work for would have been down the road a long time ago. The Port of Portland has persevered on this. I think they have an excellent track record. If you look at what they've built in our community and look at the kind of improvements they've made and what they've done for economic development here, they have a good track record, and they're going to be around. They're going to be the ones kind of managing this property long term. I think that bodes well for West Hayden Island. So those are the points I wanted to make. I also have a question on our vote number 1. I'll come back to that later when we're doing that. All right? Thank you.
Karen?
Well, I crafted some notes to myself so that I would make sure to express how I really feel. And for me, sometimes it has to be on paper. So I'm going to read it to you. These are my comments. I've been a Planning and Sustainability Commissioner for the last 4 years. It has been an appointment that I have cherished as my civic duty and a distinct honor to serve with these fine commissioners. I wanted to be a commissioner so that I could make certain to speak on behalf of East Portland residents when appropriate. Today, I find myself embroiled in a debate regarding West Hayden Island. I have read more than 2 feet of materials.
It's vertical? Yeah.
Vertically.
Yeah, go to
and
our
in
office.
fact, we just cleaned, yeah, go to my office, and you too can see where it fit into an entire gigantic tub. I have participated in many briefings, hearings, public meetings, and I have these comments to share with you. As a school district administrator, I see the urgent need for economic development in our communities as a means for the families and children of our school districts to maintain a stable life. Stability is critical to the emotional and social and educational success of all children. So I see the port and the city's development of West Hayden Island as something positive in general. I do believe most of the economic development arguments I have heard passionately and clearly stated here, and would support guarantees that jobs would go first to local residents. In 1983, when PGE owned the island, it was added to Metro's urban growth boundary in order to satisfy the long-term regional need for water-dependent deepwater marine terminal and industrial facilities development. In 1994, the port purchased the property for marine industrial development. Now fast forward to today, and we are voting on whether or not to annex this island into the city and to develop 300 acres for this very purpose. In the winter of 2008, the planning process began in earnest with public meetings, work groups, community input, many excellent informational reports by staff and several studies, including a health impact study. After considering all of that, this is what I asked myself while making this decision today. Number 1, why would we do this? Number 2, are there Native American treaties today that would preclude us being able to do this? And 3, what mitigation processes would be put into place to keep the environment healthy and viable, and who would pay for them? So since we cannot be here all day and night listening to the commissioner statements, I can summarize my decisions in a few simple ways. Number 1, I believe that this land was already designated for this purpose. 300 acres for deepwater marine economic development while keeping 500 acres preserved. I believe that while the majority of Native Americans in the area do not want this development, if not all, there has not come to light any treaty that this would be violated doing this development in a court of law. Not at this point, and I've asked and went to a separate meeting about it. I also like the consultation model with Native American peoples and the advisory group requirements in the IGA. And number 3, the mitigation package with ranges of cost and requirements for partnerships would largely satisfy the environmental issues, at least the ones I have in my own mind. I therefore feel that I will vote yes on the annexation and will be supporting the PSC developed package that will go to City Council.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah. I also want to start out with some thanks, and let me just preface this by saying that I have given the issues of West Aden Island a lot of thought and also a lot of heart, and really tried to scope out how do we make this work. And I really appreciate the insights and the involvement of many in the community. Certainly, my fellow commissioners here at the table, city and county staff, Port of Portland staff and leaders, the representatives of the tribal nations, our elected officials, community-based organizations, and most importantly, the community members, especially those who live on the island. I also want to thank you, Andre, for your leadership around this issue, and particularly in trying to keep us together in the last the final push here. So
Thank you.
After all this, thought and study and, listening to myself and to others, here's where I am today. I'm choosing to kind of focus narrowly. I'm on the commission as the health guy, and so I'm going to come at it primarily from health perspective here. And to, really paraphrase or duplicate what Chris and Leilani talked about, really our goal as a planning commission is providing the city council with advice, and that advice really, we're trying to balance 3 things. One is achieving the benefits of economic development and doing that in a way that fits the spirit of the Portland plan. And for me especially, the potential for family wage jobs in the community is critically important economically, but it has a huge health impact on folks. And then we're trying to balance that against minimizing the health and environmental harms that are going to be associated with development, and I'm fully convinced that there will be harms. And I think what we've adopted as a group is, where possible, reducing, including plan elements to prevent these harms, where we can do that, and where we can't do prevention, then identifying effective mitigation actions. I think we as a group, in approaching the health and the environmental impacts rather and harms, we've really adopted a pretty explicit policy goal of a net increase in ecological function. And we've been clear, and I think, Chris, you really articulated, because of the relative simplicity of ecosystems, which in themselves are incredibly complex, it's still a little simpler than the human health stuff. And so we've been, fortunate to have some metrics and some well-developed science-based plans on that. I would argue that we have done the same thing in health, but in a more implicit way, where we have really recognized that there are health concerns, but we have been unable to articulate those as clearly because of the complexity. We've had the benefit of receiving from Multnomah County and its community-based organization partners a health analysis which really lays out in pretty broad brush and somewhat specific fashion what we can expect as the health harms and benefits from this scenario. And that analysis, I think, made it really clear that there's a wide range of potential things that could happen. And I'm not going to read the whole health analysis, but I just want to highlight a few things. There's likely to be increased air pollution, and that increased air pollution may well play out in terms of increased respiratory illness, heart disease, and potentially lung cancer. There's going to be noise and vibration that is experienced by the people who live nearby the industrial site, and that'll result in sleep disturbance, annoyance, and stress, and those things in turn can contribute to mental illness and poor functioning in the community. And the development will probably result in some economic instability for residents, and that economic instability is incredibly important for health. It's associated with poverty, and the instability itself is associated with a range of health risks, including the risk of chronic illness and overall life expectancy. So this is serious stuff. I just picked those three out. There will also be some benefits. As originally planned, prior to the CRC decision, we would expect fewer traffic accidents. I don't know if that's going to hold up, absent CRC. Improved employment opportunities, which I mentioned is really important. Improved recreation and physical activity opportunities, which will buffer some of the adverse effects that are being created and will decrease the impacts of chronic disease. So there are good and bad things going on. In our May 28th meeting, I believe that the PSC took a really important step that embraced the approach to health that I've described and really made it parallel to that in the environment. We recognized the negative impacts. We took a position that preventing and mitigating these impacts should be guided by a planned future health impact assessment to build on the work, that's already been done. And then we unanimously approved a bundling of various components of funding into a broader prevention fund, which resulted in the $17 million roughly figure that we saw on the chart today. And so to me, this all felt appropriate given the uncertainties that we were facing at the May 28th meeting. Uncertainties about the specific development plan and uncertainties about what steps will be necessary to mitigate the potential negative impacts. Now we have the further uncertainty of the CRC, and that's troubling to me. And we don't really know how this is going to play out. And again, I'm trying to be the rationalist science guy here. And, absence of the CRC may make things worse in terms of adverse impacts. It may make things better. We don't really know. We don't really know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to be necessary to mitigate it. So as of today, I'm finding myself feeling pretty uncomfortable with the July 3 memo and the range of $5 to $17 million. We talked about a figure of up to 17, post-bundling. And so I think throwing the 5 in there as a floor really represents an explicit alternative, and I think it gives a signal to the port, which I'm not comfortable with. And then, as I've stated before, I have real problems with the economic analysis underlying decisions to make the mitigation packages cheaper. I think the information has not been fully transparent. Revenues have been systematically underestimated. Costs have been systematically overestimated. And then we're trying to balance that on the backs of a small number of mitigation items. And, from my perspective, the project is going to cost what the project is going to cost. And the port and its partners should be motivated intrinsically to find cost-effective solutions. And so it just makes me really uncomfortable that we're in a position of cutting mitigation while there's all this other economic uncertainty. I'm also feeling a little uncomfortable with the CRC approach. I voted for the amendment today because it allows further process and it allows further Planning and Sustainability Commission involvement. So I think that's a positive thing. But substantively, I'm really concerned about the health analysis because the health analysis was based, and particularly the air pollution stuff, was based on a scenario that included CRC, and it included pollution related to CRC. And we kind of don't know where that fits. So that throws a whole new level of uncertainty in there. And so, I think as many of you have already summarized, I think there's a lot more work to be done. The issue is not going to go away, regardless of how we vote today. We may vote annexation up or down today. We'll find out in a little while here. But I think we as a community need to continue to commit to understanding what is it going to take to develop these family wage industrial jobs. How do we support that, and how do we do that in such a way that is not harmful to human health and not harmful to the environment? So,
thanks, Mike.
When Mayor Adams testified before us and urged us to move forward in November, he cited the fact that during his staff looking through the history of West Hayden Island, came across testimony from myself in 1983, 30 years ago, opposing bringing West Hayden Island into the urban growth boundary. And he opined that I probably had a similar opinion today, and he was right, because I am opposed to annexing West Hayden Island. But actually for more reasons than in 1983. In 1983, I argued, as did others, that it is an irreplaceable resource on the lower Columbia River. But today, 30 years later, Chinook salmon, steelhead trout are listed under the Endangered Species Act. We heard from the tribal representatives that they've, spent huge amounts of effort to restore salmonids on the Columbia. I'm not sure that we're really taking their concerns fully into to account here. 30 years ago, climate change was not seriously considered a major issue. In my opinion, areas, and Chris spoke eloquently to this. Actually, I think he wrote my comments today as I looked through them. The need for protection of large sites like West Hayden Island for resilience on the river is incredibly important, I think. And as has been pointed out, we really don't know what the future holds for flooding on the lower Columbia River, both as a function of climate change and, of course, the treaties going to be renegotiated. We're not absolutely clear what impacts that might have. And you combine that with the potential for earthquakes, which we know are very real, siting this facility on that island compared to other opportunities on the lower Columbia River strikes me as bad logic. There are other reasons. The economic analysis, reading through Eco Northwest and the other analyses of job creation and so forth, I just don't buy that this is going to be a huge job creator, frankly. Actually, the Atlantic magazine just came out on July 3rd with an analysis of why Portland's a cool place, one of which is manufacturing of electronics and so forth. I think there are ways we can generate those good-paying jobs in ways that will actually produce more jobs than this particular proposal. And even with mitigation, I actually want to echo Chris's comment that, and when I agreed to serve on the Planning and Sustainability Commission, it was, and this is no dig to folks who work on codes and zoning and so forth. They said, I really wasn't interested in doing so unless we really truly did start addressing sustainability, meaning social, environmental, and economic issues equally. And I would agree with Chris that what I've seen in this conversation, and I'm particularly proud of the fact and thankful that even though we have very different opinions among the commission, the idea of hewing to the tenet of net increase improvement in ecological function was a critical element of our conversation, and I'm really pleased that you stuck with that with 110%. I think it was really incredibly important. However, even with all the great work we did, and I agree with Chris, I'm going to vote yes on the package because I think it's really important. We send a unified, strong message to council that we expect that not to be watered down. Because if it is, there's no way we're going to accomplish social, environmental, and economic objectives. But I would say that even with all that great work, I don't think that the sum of the parts will equal what we currently have in West Hayden Island, as Chris pointed out. I absolutely agree with that. Victor Viets, the community has provided incredibly important input to us. Victor in particular, I would like to single out, who said if you can't do it right, don't do it, numerous times. And I agree with him. And I want to make one more point, and this is not a rebuttal to Don. Actually, we've had this exchange before. Last time I said, there are no good guys and bad guys here. These decisions are not about the port not being a good actor. The decisions are about whether this is a good project or not. So I really want to make that clear. This is not anything against the Port of Portland or their staff. Voting against annexation and developing West Hayden Island is also not a vote against developing a marine export terminal or job creation. It's a vote for protecting an irreplaceable resource, and I think that we do, in fact, need to think more broadly about what the regional economy truly is and that the lower Columbia, we need, by not annexing, we would force the question of creating more cooperation on the lower Columbia River as a unit rather than the competitive mode we're in right now. So I'll be voting yes on one and against annexation for those reasons.
Thank you. Catherine?
So like Karen, I think I'm just going to read what I wrote here. I've been editing as you've all been talking, so I've got comments kind of in here with all of that. But I did want to kind of make a comment that I came very late into this process. And so last fall when we were being asked to vote, I have to say I was in a panic going, I don't understand anything that's being talked about. So I want to thank everybody for kind of taking a pause. I appreciate all the thoughtful work and input of all the concerned citizens, all of the testimony, the advisory committee's work, the expert witnesses who have helped, the port, the staff, and all of you, and for one, making me feel like I'm a little bit up to speed, and for allowing me to have the time to catch up. So that's been helpful because I feel like now I can make an informed decision. It seems to me as the newbie on the commission that this issue embodies all of the challenges of our roles and stewards on the city. It's got every little piece of trying to make a prosperous, educated, healthy, equitable city involved in just one big, large issue. And so I think our commitment to trying to get through all of this in the 6 months that we've had, well, for some of us, has been key to kind of helping to balance and understand all those goals of both the city and our region. And I think that we've got a package that does balance those, and therefore I feel comfortable moving forward with the West Hayden Island package. This kind of goes to your comments a bit, Mike. Leaving West Hayden Island as Multnomah County doesn't in any way, shape, or form guarantee that the natural resources of the area are going to be maintained or improved. Matter of fact, they may in fact be degraded. Annexation does not mean that the port will build the terminal. It just keeps the door open for further analysis and study of the myriad of further questions that need to be addressed. It allows the port to shop for an interested tenant, and if they find one, determine what the development type and footprint may be, which could lead to more accurate analysis. Perhaps more importantly, it allows this body of work that we've all done to continue versus letting it lay to rest and perhaps only surface again in years to follow, as you've experienced. I believe that this proposal that we have right now lays a solid base to achieve a net increase in ecological function and has a strong foundation to protect health with a mitigation package that's tied to the health impact analysis. Lastly, I most strongly believe that the proposed terminal is critical to our city and job creation in the region. I support the revisions to the community fund section. I agree with Commissioner Hansen's comments in a previous work session that it's important for our funds to be tied to mitigation measures for a legitimate package, whether it be upgrades to existing mobile homes, a new park, or a sound wall, or whatever kind of piece of this that we've been looking at. So funds set aside for the community should be designated and used as mitigation to offset real issues, not potential issues that we're guessing may happen or may not happen. Therefore, I would prefer to see this proposal going even further to combine the community benefits fund into the community fund, into one single fund that is all about mitigation of health impacts. It's not going to stop my vote necessarily. It's just I would have preferred to see that and have it tied to the health impact analysis. Lastly, I agree with Commissioner Smith's comments about feeling a bit of frustration when looking at this through such the narrow lens of just the city of Portland when it's such a regional issue. And I too wish there was a mechanism that we could plan this at a larger regional issue. But that being said, I am in support of both the annexation and the package for West Hayden Island.
Thank you. Howard?
Well, if I were to craft a letter of my feelings, it would probably include every one of the comments that all of you made. So you've written my letter. I thank you. Some of what you said I don't agree with, but I would have taken that out of the letter. Fundamentally, we have all behaved like professionals with a real serious kind of assignment. And so let me just be the last to say that I'm proud of us. I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud of the community. And I really want to say that this is all about community. They showed, I'm saying the community, that they really are together and connected and very determined to see this through to today. We showed that we all showed up at the same time as a community. It's all about the things that Portland stands out for, and that is outstanding for, and that is that we do build communities. So with that in mind, my votes are going to be pretty straightforward. I support the amendments because I think they're thoughtful, timely, and prescient. And I very much support annexation because I want Portland to keep control of this issue. And I want to be clear about why I said that. In the time going forward, the comprehensive plan is going to take up a much greater swath of what we're interested in than what we're talking about now. That's what planning and sustainability are all about. So by voting, in my opinion, for annexation at this time, we give ourselves the time and the opportunity to craft a really elegant solution, not only for Hayden Island and the good folks who care about this, but for the future of the whole wide swath, which you touched on, Kat. So you kind of know where I stand, and you also know the admiration I feel for all of you. I guess I want to finish this by saying that I think that this guy that you, Andre, have guided us through a very dangerous and kind of difficult situation, and you're to be congratulated for it.
I don't know about dangerous. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, start my own timer.
We'll time you.
First, I just want to offer a lot of thanks. I want to offer thanks to the community. As a community, I think you came to us with a lack of trust, and hopefully we've gained your trust. We may not be doing what you want us to do, but I believe this group has listened to you. It's incorporated in what we have as a document, and you show the rest of the city how it's to be done. So that's important. I want to thank the port. I agree with Dawn. I've been critical of the port, but it's not critical of the people. It's critical of you want people to be better than they look. I mean, you just want that betterness. And it's kind of like a child. You want them to be really good. And there's an expectation that I have of, the city ought to perform at a high level. The port is a public agency, ought to perform at a high level. Our partners perform at a high level, the community. And it's just that expectation, and that's what I was looking for. But I thank them for continuing to be partners and look for them to continue to do that and sticking through this process. Of all the nonprofits, tribal members, everybody that came and gave us technical expertise, I'm sure council's not going to have that same group come to them, but you have been great. Your expertise has informed us on our decisions, so thank you. For all the city bureaus, PBOT, BES, and all the people within them and other people, parks, thank you for coming and giving your testimony, for providing a lot of time and effort in this process. It's been invaluable in crafting a plan, in responding to the community, the port, and a lot of people there. Susan, Joe, just thanks. I mean, it's just special thanks to Eric and Rachel, responding to emails, whatever. It's just been, and lastly, to commissioners, thank you for all your help. I don't think it's been dangerous, Howard, but I just never know, but thank you. Now down to the process. The view that I took looking through this was the Portland Plan and the Climate Action Plan. And why the Portland Plan? It had all the elements how you should judge a process or a development. So prosperity, we needed to look at everybody. We said, equity for everybody, prosperity for everybody, the environment should be for everybody. So as we looked, from my viewpoint, I looked at this, wanted to make sure everybody was involved. Everybody, we were able to get prosperity for everybody. So West Hayden Island is one component of Hayden Island. And that's why I think it's important that as we look at what we are going to do here today, whether either you're positive or negative, you need to keep the rest of Hayden Island in mind, because there's economic development occurring today on Hayden Island. We've planned for 10,000 more people out there. It's going to grow probably more now because of the lack of a bridge. We need to be prepared for that economic development as well as a port. And so the community today needs to be represented, but the community tomorrow, the businesses tomorrow, the businesses today all need to be taken into account on what the solution is. And I think because of the uncertainty as we look out 10 years, this is speculation at its best. This is somebody saying they're willing to put down some money to go find a customer, and hopefully they will come. We have crafted, I think, a process, not a solution, but a process that says whatever comes from not only Hayden Island, but from West Hayden Island, there's a process to evaluate that. There's a process to say, how do we capture the economic benefit? How do we capture the ecological benefits and keep those and enhance those? How do we do both of those, have prosperity and ecological benefit, and have community health? We're truly exploring on this health impact analysis. This is the first one the city's doing as a big project. It's going to be a learning process, but it sets a ground, it sets I guess, a path by which the communities elsewhere in Portland and us as a commission can look and say, it's not perfect, but it's a way to tell the community in the future, we have your interests in mind. And to the issues that Gary brought up, let's take a look at it when we have an actual development. When you have an actual development, a lot more will be clear. And I'm not a developer, but developers always tell me if they have a clear path, they can figure out how to develop. And I think this gives the port as clear a path as you can with the number of uncertainties. Another idea that I think is important that we keep in mind is the climate action plan. As we look at the climate action plan, which we will be doing in the next 6 months, we'll be talking about how do we reduce emissions. Hayden Island is going to be part of that solution. As commissioners, we're going to be talking about that in a global sense. Truck emissions are a point source that we will have to evaluate, and we'll be going to council with a series of recommendations and updates probably on the climate action plan. We need to keep in mind, we can't isolate Hayden Island, West Hayden Island from a climate action plan. So part of that decision-making process on Hayden Island has to be around the transportation solution and how we can do that more efficiently with not only getting people on and off in some kind of bridge, but also looking at how do we reduce the number of trips through bike, walking, and mass transit. So it's more of a comprehensive solution. It's just not how do we get 200 trucks onto that island. CRC was to provide that solution. It's not. So now we've got to go back as the city of Portland and lead that charge in my mind around climate action, how to reduce climate action, but get a solution that works for the entire island, that continues the prosperity that's occurring there today and offers the opportunity for future prosperity. I think we, as we look forward, we need to say, one of the things that I said when we first started this process, this was going to be our decision when it was handed to us. I feel good about that. I feel good that it is our decision. It's not a council-driven decision. It's what we've crafted, what our recommendation to council is. It emphasizes one of the things that was early on that was pointed out by Keith from the port. They can't do things the way they've done them in the past. I think that's an acknowledgement that the port needs partnerships. we need partnerships to get things done today. You just can't go out and build it yourself. So the more partnerships, the more tribal members, the more community that help in that, the better the solution is. Is this a perfect solution? No, because there's a lot of unknowns, but it lays a framework to get to a better solution. I think the, as you look down the road, we have enough markers, and this is kind of the last part, we have enough markers in this document, I believe, for whoever the person that picks this up and says, now we have a port, now we have a transportation solution, how do we then solve this problem? We have enough markers to provide them, I think, succinct guidelines that get them to a solution that, again, meets the Portland Plan, meets the Climate Action Plan, and satisfies our ecological goal, our community health goals, and satisfies the community prosperity goals, the prosperity for the, putting a new port in, but also continues to allow growth on Hayden Island that is planned in the Hayden Island Plan. So it really is, how do we do all that together? I think we need to look at that. I'm in favor of the first vote because that's, if you're going to do development, that's how you ought to do development. And we need to be clear to council, if you're going to do it, this is how you're going to do it. And that's what they asked us to respond to. The second vote, I'm in favor of because it keeps the ball in our court and allows us to come up with a solution that meets all of the Portland Plan and the Climate Action Plan goals better than having that outside of our purview. So with that, I'm done. And thank you again. So we're going to vote. Don, you had a question before the vote.
Actually, I don't. I reread the information and actually answered my own question.
Okay. So we have two motions for vote.
We have one motion, don't we?
We have two votes. We'll have
Two votes, but one motion's on the floor.
We'll have a motion for each vote. So,
The motion for vote number one, and I don't want to read it all, it's on the board.
Second.
it's been moved in second. Julie, vote?
Ray?
Yes.
Hanson?
Yes.
Hout?
Yes.
Elias?
Yes.
Oxman?
Yes.
Schultz?
Yes.
Shapiro?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Valdez?
Yes.
Baugh?
Yes. Motion one passes. Vote on number two, the annexation.
I'm happy to make a motion for number two as well.
Okay. The
want me to read it?
annexation, vote two is the annexation. Motion to recommend City Council annex West Hayden Island into the City of Portland as amended from previous discussions.
Second.
Huh?
Second.
Second. Don, second. Julie, vote?
Ray?
Yes.
Hanson?
Yes.
Hout?
Yes.
Elias?
Just want to see if you were listening. No.
Tobias?
No.
Oxman?
Yes.
Schultz?
Yes.
Shapiro?
Yes.
Smith?
No.
Valdez?
Yes.
Baugh?
Yes. Can you tell us what that vote was? If I 7-3, okay. With that, I think we conclude. We will, I guess, in the coming months, get a lengthy letter to council together. Susan?
Yes.
More than one page, I'm sure.
Right. So we can wind this up with a letter that will bring either back to the next meeting, or we can just send it around. I think it would be good to do this in a somewhat timely manner, so my preference would be to send it around, get comments, get final approval from you all, and then to get it out to council within the next 10 days or something like that. We'll do a draft, and you all can add what seems
So
appropriate.
the people that voted no on annexation, I'd like you to give Susan and staff your thoughts of why no. Even though Julie probably has them in the notes, if they're even, if they're different than doing that. Okay.
And we also have an opportunity with council to
Follow up, yes.
And that's my point. Were we not going to call on, this is
We're
one where
gonna-
I think we want to be well represented on both sides of our conversation, with council members individually and at the council hearing itself, and I hope you'll facilitate that.
Yes,
We want to do that. We also
Yes.
want to have an opportunity to pause to collect our thoughts so that we have a way to provide that information to all the council members. You probably need sort of a schedule. It'll probably take, my guess, 6 or 8 weeks to actually meet with everybody, given everybody's councils. But I'm assuming that you're going to want 3 or 4 people at each one of those meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea is that everybody gets 1 or 2 shots at one of the council people to represent.
I just want to congratulate you all on an amazing job at working together to come to consensus with a framework that I think will be an amazing sort of pedestal for future people to make decisions on. So thank you very much.
I guess I want to be, are we still in session? Because this is just conversational.
No.
Hayden Island hasn't gone away. It's become very much a part of our conversation in the comp plan, don't you?
Yep.
So it's really, this hasn't ended, it's continuing in a very good way. I just want to be
Chapter
clear
2.
about that. I didn't know at the end for you guys. I wanted-
Thank you, I think we're concluded.
It's not over.
You're not going to have beer?
We had Gary there for a moment.
Howard's been flip-flopping back and forth for the last
I know,
24
right?
hours.
Yeah, 3 in the morning.